Anyone who's ever experienced the thrill of competitive gaming has at one point or another wondered if they could turn their hobby into a career. This year, the University of Utah is offering students just that by giving out partial competitive esport scholarships for the popular multiplayer online battle arena game League of Legends. The University of Utah isn't the first to try such a scholarship. South Korean universities, such as the prestigious Chungang University, have recognized esport athletes to be on the same level as traditional athletes for over a year now. With Utah's status as one of the 5 richest athletic conferences in college sports, it seems that the U.S. is gearing up to take the world of esports more seriously now. In the long run, Utah hopes to expand the program through sponsorship, deals, and marketing. Eventually, they'd like to extend full scholarships to as many as 35 esport athletes. All right, well, go ahead, Max.
Yeah, this is sort of bizarre. I suppose it makes sense because it is a type of skill, and esports is a growth industry. It's certainly at a place now where it's bigger than it's probably ever have been. You see people filling up theaters and cheering on people playing games. So that it's understandable that that's something that you might want to try and invest in as the world of gaming grows bigger. However, it's kind of weird how they're going to offer a scholarship for this sort of thing, because in contrast with something else that's competitive, obviously like sports, how can you train competitive gamers like you would train an athlete, right? Because with athletes, you'd have exercise regimens, diet regimens, but with gaming, I don't know exactly how you can break down sort of a schedule, a routine to try and improve your skill. It's something that is sort of unique to people, and there's different play styles, many more than, you know, some basic things that you would do in hockey or basketball or something like that. So I'm not really entirely sure how they're going to make that sort of thing work. Though United referred to its contract of carriage in this situation, which says it can deny boarding to passengers if a flight is overbooked, and no passengers volunteered to give up their seat, many are questioning why United didn't offer a bigger incentive before resorting to forced removal. According to the Chicago Sun-Times, the Chicago aviation police officer involved in the incident has been put on leave. This is just... God.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because it's the cops' fault that this all happened. Oh, my God.
Well,
I didn't hear that part before.
Yeah, an important distinction is that it was police. People were saying it was TSA or something else. Some people were, but it was police. And I didn't know that this was in Chicago. I didn't know that, but now that I know that, it doesn't surprise me. So, pretty messed up.
And here's the thing that really struck me about this, and this was reported on the Hills blog. This was not accommodating passengers, you know, that were just passengers. This was for employees. They were removing paying passengers to accommodate employees of the airline who were traveling. And I looked for any information to say that this was to accommodate flight crew, because the flight crew has to be seated during the flight, but it wasn't. I finally turned to watching television news last night, which was, that always sucks because you always see shit on television news. But Fox actually had one of the passengers come on and talk about the experience, and he said that like the passengers spent the flight berating the flight crew, or the employees that were being accommodated, that how dare they kick this guy off so they could have their flight. And that's basically what happened there. Was this guy got kicked off of an air flight that he paid for so that United's employees could be accommodated. And the cops reacting to it, by the time the cops got there, there was an actual conflict. And it's not necessarily his reaction wasn't necessarily an overreaction under the circumstances, but neither was theirs. They're cops that walked onto an airplane to remove a passenger who was flailing around and by that time unruly. And they did their job. And I don't fault the cops in this. I fault the airline.
Absolutely. I was gonna say I'll if I can help it, I won't be flying United, if at all possible.
Yeah, I was going to advocate for them after the leggings incident, because the leggings incident, the outrage over the leggings incident was bullshit. You had an employee who used a company benefit, so their family was accommodated by the airline at a lower rate than they would have paid if they'd have just gone out and bought a flight. And because they fly as guests of the employee, they represent the airline. They got a dress code, and one of the family members brought kids, failing to follow the dress code. And at first, the information that first came out made it look like the parents were mad and tweeted about it, but it was actually some idiot feminist that saw the incident take place and made a big deal about it. And that everybody got all outraged over a girl having to change clothes to follow a dress policy for employees. But it takes something like this for people to get outraged on behalf of a guy. And I mean, if you think about it, we've had stories in the men's movement. We've had stories for years of men being forced to change seats on airplanes at the beginning of the flight when they're not supposed to make you change a seat. Because they always tell you you're not allowed to trade seats with somebody until the plane is in the air, and then you have to return to your seat before it lands, your original seat before it lands. And they always say that it's because if there's an accident, if there's a crash or something, that it's so that you can be identified for medical purposes. If you're injured, and that they know that they're treating the person with the medical history, that they can find out, and things like that. Your family knows who was injured and who wasn't, but they'll force men to move because of the misconception that men are dangerous to children. And only people in the men's movement have had the awareness to be outraged at that, because
Right.
they don't do that to women. In fact, they'll move adult women that are strangers to children next to those children to avoid having a man sit next to them. But until they pulled a doctor who has other people depending on him off of the plane, nobody cared. And until they beat the hell out of the guy doing it, nobody cared.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I mean, this isn't per se a men's issue, because the airlines do this to everybody. But the fact that it took something like this for people to get outraged over the treatment of a man on an airline, that is a men's issue. And the fact that people are wanting to blame the cops now for something that was really the airline's fault is a men's issue too, because I'll bet not one of those cops was a girl. This is one reason why I would advocate a federal law that made it legal in all 50 states of the U.S. to record if you're in public, and that if you're involved in a conversation and the other person records it, that person has the right as long as they're involved in the conversation.
Yeah.
Like, we've got states now that if you call somebody and they record the phone call, you can actually file charges against them, or the state will file charges against them. If somebody calls you in that state and you record the phone call, you can get in legal trouble for it. That's wrong. If somebody calls you, you should be able to record the call. If somebody comes to your house and talks to you, you should be able to record the call, or record the conversation. And that's just, this type of thing is why.
Absolutely.
You do have the right to prove yourself right or prove yourself wrong. Basically, prove the facts of what happened, and when somebody's story might not be the same, or when somebody might have a reason why they don't want people to know what happened.
Rule number one in life, according to the Honey Badger Brigade: record everything.
Always be recorded. Well, think about it. The Calgary Expo situation. What would have happened there if we hadn't had Sage's recording? We'd have been fucked. Everything they said about us, that would have been the only official story. There would have been no way to contradict it. It would have been in just our word against theirs.
Yep.
You know, and in the U.S., there are states where the law says that's the way it has to be. Now, I live in a state that's different than that. If a telemarketer calls me, and I can record the call. If a collection agency calls me, I can record the call. If the government calls me, I can record the call. It's one of the reasons I have the recording that I made when I had the conversation with the researchers from the CDC that had done the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey. I was calling from Ohio, which is a state where only one party involved in the conversation has to know that it's being recorded, to Georgia, where only one party has to know, and so I was able to record the call. And technically, just the fact that I was in Ohio was all I really needed. So, but if I'd have been if I'd have been in a state where it was illegal for me to record, and I had recorded it, you know, I'd have been in trouble. Or if I'd have been in a state where it was illegal for me to record and I'd obeyed the law, I would have had nothing to report. So it's very important. It's very valuable for a citizen to be able to record. It's valuable to the citizens and the police for citizens to be able to record the police, because not only can we be there when they're doing something wrong, but there have been times when citizen recordings of the police have demonstrated that they didn't do anything wrong. And so the recording is very important.
John Platt, a UK father, has been fined, what for? For taking his 6-year-old daughter out of school without permission to visit Disney World in Florida. Interestingly enough, it wasn't that Mr. Platt didn't ask for permission. Rather, when he did, the school simply refused it. As one might guess from the context of this article, Mr. Platt disregarded this and took her anyway. Because it's his fucking daughter. Apparently, though, due to the history of school attendance laws that date back to the 1870s, school boards are empowered to require attendance by children ages 5 through 12, which was the reason the UK Supreme Court ruled to uphold the fine. At the same time, the ruling overturned 2 lower courts' decisions that had already been in favor of Mr. Platt, who had argued that the government's case represented a vast overreach of the nanny state. When asked about the outcome, he replied, quote, "You are not the final arbiter of what's right for your child," end quote. Overall, the case has drawn heavy debate across Britain since it calls into question the rights of parents to raise their children as they see fit, as pitted against stiff truancy laws in a nation where school attendance is not just mandatory, but compulsory.
Get the fuck out of here. Are you serious? It went through 2 lower courts?
Yes.
I'd never heard of this series, but apparently there's a series called A Brave New World, the series. And in this week's episode, a South Dakotan man is the most recent victim of yet another forcibly catheterized to provide a urine sample fiasco perpetrated by Pierre Police Department's finest. The description that Dirk Sparks gave about his ordeal reads like something out of a horror novel. Quote, "A mesh bag blurred his vision. He lay hooded and handcuffed as 4 police officers pinned him to a hospital exam table. Through the patterned light, he saw a 5th officer filming the procedure. His pants were loosened and pulled below his waist. Then pain. A nurse at Avera St. Mary's Hospital in Pierre had inserted a pencil-sized tube into his urethra to drain his bladder. Oh, God. Moments later, an officer with the Pierre Police Department held a cup of his urine that soon would be sent off for drug testing. This was all in response to a domestic dispute at Sparks' home several hours earlier, when officers who arrived on the scene observed him acting fidgety and asked for a urine sample. When Sparks refused to provide one, the police sought a warrant from a Hughes County country judge to obtain a urine sample from Sparks by, quote, medically accepted means. Evidently, it is medically acceptable it's medically acceptable to shove a pencil-sized tube into a man's penis for the purpose of extracting his urine on a hunch it might contain proof of drug use. And what's more, that the warrant was granted to do it. Oh, and by the way, in case you don't already feel bad for Sparks, a 3-year-old boy had a similar procedure done to him as part of a child welfare investigation involving drugs earlier this year. Try to wrap your head around that one. Are you kidding me? Isn't that supposed to be... Yeah, go ahead, Hannah.
We think your child might have been drugged, so we're going to molest him. From his perspective, we're going to molest him, and that will help protect him from any harm. Molesting your child is the only way that we can protect him from any harm. Yeah, you know what? Fuck that. We have these conversations in the United States about bodily autonomy. And the conversations seem to usually revolve around women's rights, you know, the right to choose whether or not to have an abortion, the right to rewrite your sexual history with someone to suit your current mood and say that you were violated if you changed your mind about what you did with them, and things like that. And yet, if you're accused of putting something into your body that other people disapprove of you putting into your body, the cops can go in after it without your consent, and people don't see that as a violation of your right to bodily autonomy. Like, what the hell kind of convoluted logic leads us to that kind of contradiction?
Mm-hmm. And plus, you know, from what I understand, one of the most painful things that a human being can go through, particularly for men, is to have kidney stones, you know, to try and pass that sort of thing. But to try and shove a tube up a man's urethra, and to do that to a 3-year-old boy, that's...
Catheterization itself, like in a real, genuine medical setting, where it's medically necessary because the urine cannot escape the bladder, because that's one thing. That and it's uncomfortable. I mean, I've been catheterized before. It's very uncomfortable, and there's a definite. I don't know. I'm kind of skewed when it comes to pain, because if it's not major pain, it doesn't really register. But it is very, very discombobulating. But I can imagine for a situation where you are restrained and upset and it's forced, that would be painful.
Thomas Clock, a straight male student, committed suicide after a Title IX kangaroo court. The University of Texas ignored its own policies to punish Clock for sexual assault, and now his father is suing the university for violating his son's Title IX rights. The accusing student's story is that Clock had opened his laptop to type "gays should die." The accuser claims that he responded on his own laptop, "I'm gay," and that Clock then said under his breath that he was a faggot. The accuser said he should leave the class, and Clock allegedly responded, "You should consider killing yourself." Notice a lot of this stuff is all hearsay and alleged stuff, right? No real evidence for sure. Clock denied this accusation, and administrators who investigated acknowledged that there was no evidence that supports the accuser's claims. Clock said the accuser made unwelcome sexual advances on him. Clock rejected those advances and told the accuser that he was straight by typing the message in his search browser. After further advances, Clock said that he was the one to ask the accuser to leave. The lawsuit suggests that perhaps the rejection led the accuser to make up a story, possibly from his own fear of being accused of sexual misconduct. Despite learning that Clock may have been the victim of sexual harassment, no investigation was conducted, and Clock was not told he should file a report. The accuser reached out to Associate Vice President of Student Affairs Heather Snow, with whom he had a friendly relationship. Snow became the accuser's advocate, helping draft a complaint and conducting a disciplinary procedure without following the school's Title IX policies. UTA's Title IX coordinator was not informed, even though Snow suggested it constituted sexual harassment, and the Title IX coordinator should have been responsible for overseeing the investigation. Clark received no hearing, even though he contradicted his accuser's claims. Had Snow reported to the Title IX coordinator, Clark would have received protections from the school. Clark was immediately prohibited from attending the class where the incident was alleged to have occurred, was not told the name of his accuser, of course none of us know who that is either, informed that he could not contact anyone in the class, and effectively denying him the ability to find a witness to corroborate his story. Clark was charged with violating Title IX solely on the accusation, and was charged with 2 violations: physical abuse or threat thereof, and a non-specific violation of the school's anti-harassment policy. He was informed that this disciplinary record could keep him out of grad school, which Clark had planned to pursue, and just days after all this had gone down, Clark took his own life.
This is one of many reasons why I think if you file a false charge, if you go to authorities with a false complaint of this nature, or any false complaint where a finding against the person that you're complaining about can result in penalties, you should face a criminal charge. It's not just slander, it's not just rumors. You are threatening somebody with penalties, with criminal penalties. And I every time you talk about something like this with a feminist or an advocate for this Title IX shit, and the Dear Colleague letter and the Campus Save Act and all that, they'll turn around and say, well, it's not that bad for the accused because he doesn't have to go to court, he doesn't have to deal with criminal allegations. But then they want it in place because these allegations are so serious that the accuser should have some kind of recourse just in case they can't get justice in the court system. And I keep hearing the word justice substituted for the word conviction. Mm-hmm. Conviction isn't justice. Acquittal isn't justice. The pursuit of justice is the pursuit of the truth of a situation as it can be proved. And then the decision to act on the information that has been gathered and assessed in the most rational and reasonable, fair and legal way. And this is not justice under any circumstances. If the complainant in this was telling 100% truth, this would not have been justice. If the guy hadn't killed himself and he had faced whatever he would have had to face, and he was actually guilty of criminal sexual harassment, just kicking him out of school wouldn't have been justice either. Kicking him out of school is a terrible thing if he didn't deserve it, but not facing a criminal allegation if you have done something that victimizes another person, when there is a process in place to deal with that type of victimization, isn't justice either. It leaves the individual free to go and do it again to somebody else, somewhere else. And even if you are a victim, you are not entitled to make that decision, because the crime isn't just about you. It is about the criminal as well. Mm-hmm. And the legal repercussions aren't in place just for the victims. They are in place for the other potential victims as well. So all around this is bad. And this situation, and once again, this is why I say a false accuser who puts a person in a position where they are at risk of facing repercussions as a criminal, whether it's in a system like this or in a legal system, that person should face a criminal charge for the same reason. If they get away with it, if nobody ever does anything about that false allegation, that person and the next false accuser and the next are free to just go and do that again and again, to victimize the people that they victimize. This has to change.
I was given the task of summarizing an article about MGTOW, and this might be the first one that I've ever summarized or read that doesn't have either the word sexist or misogynist in it. So, woohoo. While that's a gain, though, when it comes to tackling issues honestly, there's also a worrisome element to this article that regresses said gain. So apparently, the men going their own way phenomenon has found its way to Australia, and it is no longer exclusive to men 20 years of age and older. At least that's the way I used to perceive it. Apparently, gender relations have gotten so bad that teenagers are now embracing the MGTOW ethic. And in an article from news.com.au, Corinne Barraclaw interviews boys from schools in New South Wales. One young man describes MGTOW in the way we've commonly come to understand it. Quote, "This isn't about a specific rule book, more a mindset, although there are purists in the movement who are the most extreme and avoid women entirely. There's a growing number of men who've had enough of feminism and enough of being told they have to work for a greater good, which doesn't actually exist." A 15-year-old young man named Tom, his real name was omitted, describes it in a more worrisome way. Quote, "It's probably not true of all women, but I've got the feeling that women are dangerous. Maybe the men around me have just had bad experiences. Last year, my uncle lost everything because his wife of 40 years decided she didn't love him anymore. Just like that, she randomly got up and left. It got nasty and he lost everything. His house, cars, and loads of his money. There's no way I'm ever getting married." Author and psychologist Meredith Fuller comments on the issue, which she describes as incredibly sad. Quote, "Both sexes have different challenges. We've lost sight of that. We're stuck in a gender war and it's harming our children. It's become very narcissistic, selfish, and a sense of entitlement is running rife. We need to get a focus back on having respect for other human beings, for partnerships, loving bonds, and trust rather than simply seeing what you can get out of a relationship." Now, this is probably the most balanced article I think I've ever read on MGTOW, where they're just trying to represent as accurately and as honestly the issues at hand as best they can. But still, it's sort of, for me at least, it's sort of a bit worrisome that there are kids that are this young that are becoming so afraid of women that they go that far to say that they're dangerous on the whole.